Welcome to the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum, Oregon's premier public affairs forum. I'm Sue Thomas, president of City Club, and I welcome you all, those of you here at the Governor Hotel and those of you listening on OPB or KBPS radio or watching on cable television. Thank you for joining City Club today on Friday, November 13th for this week's Friday Forum. Our speaker today will discuss how innovative ideas and research may be the key to sustainable economic recovery. But first, some announcements. In consideration of those sitting close to you and those in our radio and television audiences, I ask that everyone in the room who has not already done so to please silence your cell phone. As always, we offer our appreciation to our Friday Forum corporate sponsors, whose generous financial support make these time-honored City Club luncheons possible. Please join me in thanking as our sponsor, the law firm of Barron Lieben, and let's offer an especially big thank you to our sponsor who's represented at the front table here, Zimmer, Gunsel, Frasca. If your company or firm would like to be a Friday Forum sponsor, please contact City Club staff at the back of the room or call the City Club office. City Club's annual fund plays a significant role in sustaining our civic engagement efforts. We would like to take this opportunity to sincerely thank those of you who have donated so far to this year's annual fund. I would ask you, if you have already donated to the annual fund, would you please stand up and be recognized, and I'd like to give those folks a round of applause. So for those of you who have already donated. You don't need to be a member to donate to City Club's annual fund. If you believe in our mission or attend our programs, your donation can improve our ability to engage the community in the issues that matter most. There are envelopes on the table which you can fill out and give to City Club staff at the back of the room. We encourage you to make a donation to support City Club's civic engagement efforts today. At next week's Friday Forum, in conjunction with Willamette Week and Momentum Market Intelligence, we will award Skidmore Prizes to 4 remarkable nonprofit workers under the age of 35. We invite you to join City Club in recognizing Portland's next generation of nonprofit leaders and hearing about their visions for the future of our city. And now on to today's program. In February 2009, Congress passed a $787 billion economic stimulus measure that prevented America's collapse from recession into depression. Having averted this economic catastrophe, the United States must now rebuild its path to economic stability. Today, City Club is pleased to welcome Congressman David Wu, who will argue that in order to achieve sustainable prosperity, Congress must focus its attention on spurring long-term, high-value economic growth. It must also invest in research and development to encourage both innovation and economic progress. He will contend that these investments are critical to maintaining American leadership in an increasingly competitive global market. David Wu was educated in public schools, earned a Bachelor of Science from Stanford University, and went on to receive his law degree from Yale University in 1982. In 1988, he co-founded the law firm of Cohen & Wu, where for a decade he served the high technology industry and numerous small businesses across the Northwest. David Wu has represented Oregon's 1st Congressional District since 1999. He serves on the House Education and Labor Committee and is chair of the Science Committee's Subcommittee on Technology and Innovation. As chair, he works to encourage new business investment and high-tech research, which we will be hearing about today. And now, please help me welcome today's speaker, Congressman David Wu.
Thank you very much, Sue. It is indeed wonderful to be back at the City Club. I'd like to start my talk today by invoking a Chinese blessing. It also doubles as a curse. May you live in interesting times, and we do. We live in very challenging times. Internationally, there are 2 wars going on. Domestically, we have narrowly averted a second Great Depression, and people are still hurting very, very badly. We live in very challenging times, but we have lived in even more challenging times in the past. During the very height of the Civil War, there were times when you could literally hear Confederate guns from the top of the U.S. Capitol. And during those darkest days of the American Civil War, Congress stepped up to the plate and passed 3 crucial pieces of legislation. We passed the land-grant college bill. We passed the legislation creating the Transcontinental Railroad. We passed the Homestead Act. The land-grant college bill created colleges from Oregon State University to Cornell. It not only educated people and created new knowledge, but it provided for a system of disseminating that knowledge into our agricultural community and our economy. The Transcontinental Railroad literally knit our nation together from coast to coast, providing vital infrastructure at low cost to the public treasury. The Homestead Act not only settled the West, but also rewarded risk takers. It rewarded pioneers and provided them with a safety net, because if you lived on your 160 acres for 7 years, it became your land. You were not a tenant farmer. You were not there temporarily. It was yours. These policies, providing education, building infrastructure, and providing appropriate rewards for risk and the foundation for risk-taking, fueled the next 50 to 100 years of American growth. They were absolutely crucial to our development as a nation. Today, our nation is economically struggling. We face unparalleled international competition. For a company in Beaverton, your biggest competitors might be in Beijing or Bangalore. Idea and knowledge-driven entities like Intel, Oregon Health and Science University, and Nike not only dominate our economy, but they also face increasing international competition. Now, other countries have made a public commitment to innovation. They understand that not only are innovation and economic growth inextricably intertwined, but also that innovation is a process to be studied, to be understood, and to be promoted throughout a nation. Other countries go from nation to nation looking at innovation policy. I want to note at this point that we are joined by Consul General Okabe of the Consul General of Japan, and we welcome you here both as a good citizen of our community and perhaps to look at what we might do going forward. Other nations still come to America to look at this general process, but they generally come here not to look at our innovation policy, but they come here to look at our research facilities and to look at specific products. They don't come here to study our innovation policy because, quite frankly, we don't have one. So what I'm going to argue to you today is that just as we have invested during hard times before, we must invest today and be equally bold and visionary. Innovation is a national imperative. It is an imperative for future economic growth, and it is absolutely necessary for our survival as a great nation. Why is this? It's because innovation is how we create jobs. Experts say that between 2/3 and 90% of US economic growth from World War II to today was created by innovation. We need to dedicate the same kind of resources and organizational skills to innovation as we do to other vital national functions. We have a National Science Foundation to bring minimal organization to and to properly fund our natural science enterprise in America. We have the National Institutes of Health to minimally organize and to fund our biomedical research enterprise in America. We need to create a National Innovation Foundation which can research and understand the process of innovation, which can help educate us about what to do and which can be an effective advocate with the federal government, with state and local government, and also to disseminate that information with private companies and throughout our economy. This is emphatically not a regulatory proposal. It is to assist and research and disseminate information. It is not to choose between winners and losers. It is to set up a process of innovation which facilitates equally all services and technologies. We need a national innovation foundation because, in part, innovation is not well understood. Neoclassical economics doesn't explain well the innovation process and economic growth. It focuses on allocation of scarce resources between competing needs. We need to recognize the limitations of neoclassical economics because the current strain of neoclassical or Wall Street economics would have us believe that it doesn't matter what we make. Potato chips, silicon chips, it's all the same. It doesn't matter where we make it. We can offshore the manufacturing and other jobs will come here and it's a wash. Well, it emphatically makes a difference what we make. It emphatically makes a difference whether we are making potato chips or silicon chips. If you look at the supply chain for a microprocessor facility, it is much more complex, it is much larger than the supply chain for a potato chip factory, and also there are more businesses involved in it, they need more highly skilled labor, and those jobs tend to pay better. That's very, very important. Equally important is the downstream consequences of potato chips versus microprocessors. There's a rich ecology that grows up around places like Intel. Other companies thrive, whether it's hardware, software, internet companies, and these in turn spawn other industries, create new innovation, new economic activity. I have to add that there is also a national security implication. No one ever flew an airplane or guided a missile with a potato chip. It matters what you make. It also matters where you make it. Professor Erica Fuchs of Carnegie Mellon University has some cutting-edge research which indicates that the place of manufacture is crucial not only to jobs but also to technological innovation. This is because the most cutting-edge products frequently need to be developed in close proximity to the researchers, the PhDs and scientists who came up with the ideas to spur that product in the first place. If you offshore the manufacturing, you break those tight bonds, those twice-an-hour interactions. The offshore jobs, whether to China or India or elsewhere, wind up not being able to develop the latest generation of technology. The newest generation dies on the vine. But what happens is that process of technology transfer frequently spurs that other country to develop the ability to make the older generation of products. That older generation of products made with cheap labor then comes back to the United States and wipes out those companies which chose to stay and manufacture the same cutting-edge technologies here. So technology suffers, innovation suffers, and our economy suffers. Neoclassical economics is incomplete. It matters where you make things, and it matters what you make. Innovation is crucial, and government has a vital role. The private sector is appropriately focused on current financial statements. The days of AT&T having a monopoly, a regulated monopoly, and being able to afford the Bell Labs to be tremendous inventors, that's pretty much gone. It is the public sector which has the capacity to invest in long-term research. In essence, to carry out the intellectual overhead of private enterprise. Well, how can the federal government encourage innovation? First, let me explore a factor that is not often considered: safety nets. Safety nets can be a spur to innovation and encourage risk-taking by businesses and individuals. In a compelling article, David Kennedy, a historian at Stanford University, argues that the social safety net policies of the Franklin Roosevelt administration substantially contributed to and may have been the key to our post-World War II economic growth. This is because by passing Social Security, better housing policy, and unemployment insurance and other social safety nets, it enabled people to start businesses, and if the business failed, you weren't doomed to an old age of poverty. It enabled people to move from one job to another and from one region of the country to another and have reasonable assurance of finding housing, temporary tide over through unemployment, and ultimately labor mobility and this risk-taking were absolutely key. It seems counterintuitive in some respects that social safety nets might encourage risk-taking, but at least anecdotally, it has been my experience from my law practice that if you look at somebody who is a good risk-taker, you frequently find someone who has a parachute just in case the whole enterprise craters. It is in this frame that I'd like to encourage us to look at healthcare reform. Healthcare reform is about the humane treatment of individuals, and it's about supporting innovation. By reducing uncertainties in people's lives, we allow more entrepreneurial activities. People will be more willing to take business risks when they know that they will have access to health care. They will be more willing to start those businesses or move somewhere else when they know that their health insurance will transport with them or that they will have access to a different policy there. It's also true that our innovators need us to rein in the costs of health care. This is the case because their international competitors don't have to solely take on this cost, and also because the growth of healthcare costs is a tremendous burden, especially on our established companies, but also for those entrepreneurial ones. Healthcare, social safety nets, not something that we frequently think about. We do think about education and innovation. I think that most folks recognize that college degrees, master's degrees, PhDs are essential to training the high-tech labor force and other highly skilled workers that innovative businesses require. Now, middle-income Americans generally have access to only two assets which appreciate over time: their homes and a college education. We encourage home ownership by making mortgage interest payments fully deductible. I believe that we should do the same and make the costs of college fully deductible. We could spur innovation even further by offering tax credits, and we could address the fairness issue by making these tax credits fully refundable. We also frequently talk about K-12 education, especially here in Oregon and in this economy, and we are right to do so, because K-12 education not only prepares the students of today for citizenship tomorrow, but also for the jobs of tomorrow. It is also a crucial factor in regional economic competition. When someone makes a decision about whether to expand in place or somewhere else, when someone makes a decision about where to locate a new facility, well, no employer wants to make their employees choose between their job on the one hand and their children's education on the other. Companies are much more likely to locate in places where there is a strong public education system. And such strong systems are important factors in our local and regional competitiveness. Social safety nets and education systems are the traditional roles that people give government. They are also key to innovation and economic growth. The federal government also has specific targeted investments in specific programs, and I'd like to highlight a few and talk about how we can improve their rate of return. SBIR grants, Small Business Innovative Research Grants. They are our largest source of technology transfer dollars today. 2.5% of all federal research dollars are set aside to convert the fruits of that federal research into new products, new services, and new jobs. They're given out in the form of grants to small businesses, and there is no ask back, if you will, other than new jobs and new businesses. At almost $3 billion per year, this is the single largest source of innovation funds from the federal government. The program has not been updated in a quarter century. I've been working on reauthorization for 2 Congresses. We passed a bill in the last Congress out of the House. This Congress, we passed the bill early because we knew that it'd be a protracted negotiation process with the Senate. What I'd like to do is to bring venture capital back into the process and permit any small innovative company, no matter what their capital structure, to receive SBIR grants. Also, because the program has not been updated, the grant size is too small. The grant size does not reflect the current costs of development, and we provide for a much larger grant size. Also, we streamline the process to try to make it more user-friendly. After working on this for 2 Congresses, I'd like to report that we're in heavy negotiation with the Senate, and I have reasonable confidence that we'll get it done sometime in this Congress. SBIR is one crucial program. A separate program that I have been working with for a while is the MEP, or Manufacturing Extension Program. Just as agricultural extension disseminates knowledge to agriculture and our economy from universities, manufacturing extension programs do the same for manufacturers. They improve inventory control, push for just-in-time manufacturing, convert the traditional Ford assembly line process into the pod or group process that the Japanese innovated. I think that, well, the improvements that I'm fighting to make would add to the manufacturing extension program ways of identifying company needs early so that worker skills and worker pools can be identified, and also linkages to educational institutions to train additional workers. These are federal programs, and here in Oregon, we have many additional strengths for innovation. I'm currently working on an applied energy research facility. Energy Secretary Chu wants to set up 8 regional applied energy research labs, what he calls Bell Lablets. But these would not be fundamental research centers, but applied research centers. They would be affiliated with a university or a national lab, but outside the wire from a national lab or off campus from a university. A lot of public-private partnerships, and also a requirement for an extension program at the lab. It's pretty clear that here in this state, we have expertise at Oregon State in the extension program. Portland State is a clear leader in partnerships. Entities like PG&E and BPA are interested in contributing. And perhaps most importantly, I believe that we have the premier center on the built environment, on energy efficiency in buildings, and on renewable building construction. Thank you, ZGF, for being part of that process. We can leverage on that, and it is especially auspicious for our economy because the other aspects of energy, at least these 7 other out of the 8 labs, are focused on areas where the players are large utilities. It is in this area of building efficiency and green building where there are small players, investment opportunities, and higher job growth possibilities. In addition, we need the research base here. By adding to our research base, we will increase our competitiveness over time. At the same time, a local coalition has proposed a net zero building for downtown Portland. It will be the most environmentally advanced building ever, with energy use at net zero, water use at net zero, waste at net zero. Not only will it be a model structure, it will be a living laboratory and a teaching tool. The Applied Energy Lab that I talked about would be a model anchor tenant. Already the City of Portland and the Oregon University System and the Oregon State Legislature have committed $75 million to this project, and I intend to seek every possible way to support it with federal funds. The construction of a net zero building in downtown Portland will not only create jobs now, but it will provide a foundation for long-term jobs by making Oregon an even better center for the green building industry. I'd like to touch upon an often neglected part of our community. As we continue to diversify our energy portfolio, there are tremendous opportunities for the Indian tribes among us to be part of our national efforts, to help lead the way, and quite frankly, to prosper. I convened the first ever Tribal Renewable Energy Conference in April of this year, and convened 2 more meetings in August and in October. The meetings help us better understand the resources that are available, the challenges to be solved, and how we can best work together to help tribes lead the way in renewable energy development. Some of the problems that we identified: access to adequate transmission facilities, the ability of tribal governments to enter into long-term leases, adequate financing. The Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs has already built a biomass facility that has received federal stimulus funds, and a hydropower project, both of which are linked to regional transmission lines. Other tribes have smaller energy projects in operation and are developing additional capabilities. I find particularly intriguing the possibility of tribal participation in geothermal energy. There are 2 substantial impediments to the further development of geothermal energy, which is potentially limitless. One is financial, but the other is geographic, because geothermal energy tends to be located in places that are already designated as wilderness or as a national park. We don't want to drill in Yellowstone to build geothermal facilities, but a number of tribes in the Pacific Northwest sit on large reserves of geothermal energy. It is untapped, literally untapped potential. The final renewable energy opportunity I want to touch on is wave energy. We have the best wave energy resource in the world. The Oregon coast is the biggest wave resource place in the world, bar none. It's a unique opportunity. The technology still needs research and development. Oregon State is doing a fine job of that. We're working on better materials to resist corrosion. We need to build the facilities so that they are resistant to our winter storms. The benefits are that, again, it is a large source of energy, and it's very local. We have a localized resource here. The facilities that work, or the types of technology that work for the North Sea, for Britain or Holland, they are not well suited for the Oregon coast, and vice versa. It is local technological innovation, and it's also local jobs, because the structures that you build are too large to be easily transported, and local employment is the key. It is a jobs and energy opportunity for Oregon if we are bold enough to seize it. In conclusion, the question is whether we will step up to the plate to take advantage of our unique strengths in Oregon and nationally. Here in Oregon, we have a unique access to wave energy. We have tremendous reserves of geothermal energy, and we have an expertise in the built environment and in energy use in buildings, which is the national standard. For our nation, our research continues to be the best in the world. Our colleges and universities are the envy of the world. However, our nation has taken a haphazard approach to innovation. We have not built the connectors between our research and products, between our education and services. We can do better than this. We can do better than this with the National Innovation Foundation. We can do better with education policy that truly promotes education. We can do so by building an investment environment that promotes business risk, rewards business risk, and also a social safety net system that encourages individuals to take risks. We must do this because innovation is a national imperative. When it's 90% of economic growth, it surely is. This is the key to economic growth, and it is the key to our survival as a major power. We can do this because our forebears took the steps to encourage risk. They took bold, innovative steps like the land-grant college program, like building the Transcontinental Railroad, and enacting the Homestead Act. We need to be equally bold to meet the challenges of our time, and we can. Thank you all very much.
The first question, as always, for our speaker will be from our City Club host. Our host today is City Club Governor John Horvick. John is the project director of Parents and Children Together study at OHSU. Additionally, he is also a research associate at the firm of Davis Hibbets Midgell. He joined City Club in 2004 and has since co-chaired the New Leaders Council and is second vice chair of the Research Board and sits on the Board of Governors. John?
Thank you, Congressman. You've proposed federal legislation inspired by Oregon's Business Energy Tax Credit, or BETC. As you know, BETC provides financial incentives in the form of tax credits to businesses that invest in environmentally sustainable projects, hopefully of the sort of innovation you talked about today. While many businesses and some economists have praised BETC as a tool to lure business to the state, it's now under scrutiny. Among other things, critics argue that the cost of BETC has been grossly underestimated, that the tax credit goes to businesses regardless of whether or not they have taxable income, and that some projects have little environmental benefit. Do the criticisms of Oregon's BETC program give you pause? And what lessons have you learned from it that has informed your federal policy proposal?
Thank you very much, John. The criticisms of the Oregon BETC program have indeed informed our drafting of the federal BETC program, which in our bill stands for Building Energy Tax Credit. It's available for building, construction, and renovation, but not for other business purposes. First of all, there's an effectiveness test. We require EPA standards for a 40% increase in energy efficiency before the credits are available. It is a substantial bonus, but it is capped at $4 per square foot in construction costs. And our friends from ZGF and elsewhere have advised us and can advise us further about where to set these numbers as we go forward. Finally, there is a cap of $100 million to start this program, and that cap can be adjusted as we go forward. We want to encourage building renovation and construction that uses energy more efficiently because, as many of you know, more energy is used in our commercial and residential buildings than is used for transportation. So this is an important area to address. It's important to get it right. I think that BETC at the state level can be tweaked, but it has been an important component of retooling our economy here in Oregon, and it's time to take this with adjustments and precautions nationwide.
We'll now take questions from the floor. Asking questions at Friday Forum is a privilege of City Club membership. So to allow as many people as possible to ask questions, we ask that you keep your questions to 30 seconds. And just as a reminder, if you go over 30 seconds, you'll get a little tap on your shoulder just to remind you it's time now to ask your question.
Chris Almond, City Club member. Thank you for intersecting education and safety nets in your discussion. My concerns are our uniquely American way tends to privatize profits and socialize risks. We just voted in a health bill, which, under the circumstances, many say is better than nothing. But there was a concern for many that this should have been a robust public option, since we are approaching 17% of our GDP on healthcare, and that impacts entrepreneurs. What can you do to ensure to us that what we're going to do with healthcare reform will allow individuals and our investments as Americans to have cost containment such that we are not going to socialize this risk and impact America's prosperity?
Well, thank you very much. There is a public option in the House bill. In the past, I have supported a robust public option, but I also worked to improve that public option because, as originally drafted, it was not fair to the state of Oregon, because what has passed for a robust public option in the past is a straightforward application of Medicare reimbursement rates. We have some of the lowest Medicare reimbursement rates in the country. If an Oregon care provider is reimbursed $1 for a procedure, a provider in Miami, Florida is reimbursed $2 for the same procedure, and a provider in New York City is reimbursed $1.75. The original proposal was to have those Medicare rates plus 5% be the rate of reimbursement for the public option. That would have just burned in that inequity, and it would spread that to 10 or 11 million additional patients. We negotiated very, very hard. I fought for months on this issue, as did other members of a high-quality, low-cost coalition. These are 17 states that all provide high quality and at low cost. And quite frankly, if the rest of the nation provided care at the costs that we do, we would not have this cost crisis in our country. In essence, Oregon has been punished for doing things right. You can imagine that there was pushback from some other states. The reason why this problem has not been solved in the 44 years since Medicare was enacted is because half of the House represents places with above average compensation, and half of us represent places with below average compensation. It is a formula for political gridlock. We managed to work something out with Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania, who are pushing back very hard. There's an Institute of Medicine study, and not only is the goal to make reimbursement more fair, but it is to change the process of reimbursement to move it away from a piecework mentality and more toward a whole episode or whole patient approach that takes into account overall health, overall performance, and rewards quality. And this is something that only the lawyers in the room might fully appreciate. The process of implementing this was also very important. The other states pushed back, the high-cost states pushed back and did not want automatic implementation. We stuck to our guns because this process had been log-jammed for 44 years. And the agreement which the Speaker and the Majority Leader helped facilitate was that after the Institute of Medicine makes its recommendations, those provisions automatically go into effect unless there is a resolution which passes both the House and the Senate disapproving of that report, and which is subject to presidential veto. So in essence, it takes 2/3 to eliminate the effects of the Institute of Medicine report. There are also a lot of other cost containment provisions in the legislation. There could be more. You're absolutely right about that. But I do believe that while we see lots of warts right now because we're close to this process, we all do, I certainly do, 20, 40, 60 years from now, the product of this entire legislative process will be looked upon as something that deserves to stand beside Social Security, the GI Bill, and Medicare. And folks will wonder about two things. One is, what in God's name made it so hard to get this done in the first place? And the other is, how could we have gone so long without, on the one hand, covering 40 million Americans, giving them access to health care, and on the other hand, for those who already have insurance, providing them with the security and the stability so that they won't go bankrupt because of a coverage limitation or because of rescission, where they can get health insurance if they change jobs. I think that we will look back, and the heated debates of today, as important as they are, will be like a discussion about the color of a parachute. This is an important process. We've been going at it a long time, and it's time to get something important done.
Ted Kay, City Club member. And as treasurer of City Club, I'd like to thank you, David, for being a club member and in so doing setting an example for other public officials who represent us.
Ted, I was concerned that you were going to say I haven't paid my dues.
You're good at paying your dues, David. Thank you. The question, at Stanford 3 weeks ago, the chair of Google described as insane the U.S. immigration policy where our universities educate the best and the brightest from all over the world and then deny most of them the chance to stay and contribute the benefits of that education in this country. Would you comment on how we might reform immigration policy in that aspect?
Well, this is a difficult answer to give in down economic times because we want to look to certain processes or for a simple source of our problem. But I think that any careful study indicates that the immigration of high-skilled individuals, net, adds a tremendous number of jobs to our economy. If you walk around Silicon Valley, it's hard to be away from a business that was either started by someone from India or China or a business that's filled maybe 30%, maybe more, by folks from India or China. The head of Google is correct in that training people here and then sending them home to start businesses in their home country really doesn't make sense. I think that what many have advocated is that if you get a master's degree or a PhD here in the United States, that you ought to have access to a work visa and a chance to stay. I actually have an improvement on that concept, and this is legislation that we have submitted in the past, and we will try again when there's an opportunity to move an immigration bill. And that is that work visas for high-skilled individuals should be linked to financial aid for Americans. A high-tech company typically spends $150,000 to $200,000 to recruit an individual on recruiting fees, on moving costs, and sometimes, in other economic times, on recruiting bonuses. It is not much of an economic burden because these employees generate hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to ask the company to make a payment to a college or university, which the college or university is bound to put into financial aid for Americans. The company gets its employee much faster. And we can do this because almost all the time these employees are already in the United States. We can do background checks, and they're in master's programs or PhD. So this legislative effort is to link high-tech recruiting, solving the personnel needs, the short-term personnel needs of companies like Google, and linking it to long-term development of domestic American skills. I think this is a very, very important topic to address and to try to get right.
Peter Fenner, City Club. It's pretty clear that innovation in this country is alive and well, and we can see that in the current health process, in that there's billions of dollars being defrauded out of Medicare, as exposed by 60 Minutes recently. And on top of that, there's a tremendous growth in attorneys who I would label as ambulance chasers going after malpractice. What is being done in the current bill to provide incentives to eliminate those two problems and get at other cost reductions necessary to make this program work?
Well, the interesting thing that one finds in the innovation literature is that not all innovation is good. And the prime example of that is proper financial innovation. Medicare fraud is kind of on the shady border of that. But even legal activities, as demonstrated by the cratering of our financial industry last go round, if you develop products that don't necessarily add value and that enhance a gambling mentality, just shifting risk from what, well, actually not realistically shifting risk, that kind of innovation may be unhealthy for markets and for our society, and financial innovation is one example. Medicare fraud has been a problem. It has been investigated and prosecuted. I think that as we intelligently move away from rate work, we will have a better chance of limiting Medicare fraud because we take a broader view, a more long-term view, an episode view, and there'll be less incentive to turn procedures and to bill for individual items inappropriately. And this is an ongoing process for tamping down Medicare fraud. Mr. Leeper.
Good morning, David. Thank you very much for your comments on innovation and the need to continue the emphasis on them, if not increase that emphasis. My question concerns a whole different field. My question concerns the Department of Veterans Affairs. I personally think that General Eric Shinseki, the current secretary, is doing an outstanding job attempting to update that agency, as well as showed increased emphasis on the need to better, I think, fund the damage that we do to thousands, if not possibly hundreds of thousands of young Americans. What is your perspective on the increased emphasis that General Shinseki is placing on veterans affairs, as well as an increase, a continued increase, in funding for appropriate compensation for those that are disabled?
Well, I'm a real fan of General Shinseki, and it's not just because he's from Hawaii and earned 4 stars with kind of a sunny Hawaiian attitude. He was the guy who told the truth about what resources would be needed in Iraq. He got silenced and then ushered into retirement. I think he is a great asset at the Veterans Administration. He adds a lot of credibility because he had those 4 stars on his shoulder. Both he and this administration and the Congress have stepped up to the plate. In this year alone, there's a $14 $14.5 billion increase in resources to the VA. This only partially addresses the under-resourcing of the VA health system and other aspects of VA care. We have a covenant with our veterans to take care of them because they have served us. We all know that. We can do a better job. We're moving in that direction. And last week, I also dropped a bill to serve our rural veterans, because rural veterans are frequently in poorer health, and they have a difficult time getting to VA facilities, and they also have a difficult time accessing veteran service officers who help them with the application process and the bureaucracy. And my veteran service officer bill for rural veterans will equalize the access somewhat and treat better these rural veterans who are frequently in bad health. Yes, sir.
Congressman Wu, I'm Tom Cox. I'm a City Club member. I'm also on the Board of Governors. I'm very proud of our club and our staff for getting you, accomplishing something your staff couldn't do all summer, which is to get you into a venue that seats more than 100 people. I was locked out of your town hall, and I had to watch on YouTube when on July 1st, you were asked if you had read the legislation you had voted for. It was either the stimulus plan or the cap and trade bill. You admitted, you're very candid, thank you, that you had not read the bill that you voted in favor of. And it was a pretty hostile crowd. And their take on it, as I recall, was that you should either vote no or abstain from a bill that you had not read yourself. Can you give us, maybe in front of a more favorable crowd, an explanation of why that happened and why you didn't say at that time that you would only vote for things you'd read?
Well, you know, Tom, I disagree with your characterization of being locked out on the one hand and your characterization of my approach to legislation. We sent out notices for our town halls months in advance. We thought that the only fair thing to do was to not move from one facility to another, and quite frankly, we had great difficulty filling those places in the past. We tried to provide access to people who are outside, and one town hall in Seaside was broadcast on a local radio, and everybody could listen. I'm sorry that you didn't get there earlier. We will try to carry more speakers with us in the future. I research legislation. I read legislation. I read the entire Patriot Act, and that's why I voted against it. The health care bill is about 2,000 pages, and I am continuing to read it, and I am going to continue to read it until I get it all done, and I suspect that that will be before the legislation gets passed by Congress. This is a difficult process. It is one that I do my best on, and I know that there are folks out there who want to focus on one thing or another to take apart the entire process. But I think that everyone that I know sincerely cares about this nation, does their best to be well informed. I certainly try, and I will continue to do that.
Kurt Webering, member. At the beginning of your speech, you mentioned that we're involved in 2 wars. And undoubtedly, in developing innovation, it's always a problem when you're carrying legislation to find funds to fund innovation projects and institutes and such. My question is, how can we reduce the vast expenditures that we have for military and defense and move that more towards the private sector to develop innovation?
We have a problem in this country, and it is a problem, a challenge shared by most democracies, in that we underinvest for the long-term future and we overconsume in the short term. Military R&D is not as effective as civilian R&D. I think the estimates are that it has only half as much bang for the buck, that a military R&D dollar is only worth about 50 cents in civilian R&D. The unfortunate truth in our country is that our expenditures on military R&D probably help cover the shortfall in our civilian R&D. It's not an accident that President Eisenhower got our national highway system built by calling it the National Defense Highway System. We're frequently more willing to pay for things like that. When we put our big education bill together, I wanted to call it the National Defense Education Act. And the legislation, the seminal legislation, which was passed, I believe, in the 1950s also, was called that. There were other folks who were very concerned about the connotations of defense. I just wanted to see it enacted. We could do a better job, and we could allocate more money to civilian R&D. Over time, I hope we do that. In the short term, military R&D is, for the civilian sector, a crutch to partway get us there.
Jeannie Crouch,
Is
City Club
anybody else
member.
having a hard time hearing with the reverberation, or is it just me? Okay, maybe we could bring that ceiling down 20 feet. Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
Jeannie Crouch, City Club member. We're starting to see some indications of, small indications anyway, of economic recovery, but perhaps not what we would all like to be seeing. And Paul Krugman has made the argument that the stimulus package really wasn't large enough. Of course, there are lots of people who think it was far too large, but I'm interested in your take on that at this point. Did we do enough, and do we need to do more, and if so, how?
The estimate at the time was that there was going to be a $2.5 trillion shortfall in demand in the American economy. And as breathtaking as the size of the stimulus bill was, at $787 billion, it's less than a third, a little bit more than a quarter of the shortfall in demand. And despite concerns, legitimate concerns that we have about the deficit and about debt, the real risk is falling into a second Great Depression. And the real risk is that the stimulus bill would not be sufficient to fill the gap in demand, the $2.5 trillion shortfall in demand, even with economic multiplier effects. The environment for passing another large stimulus bill has passed much more quickly than anyone might have thought. As this stimulus bill ratchets through the economy, and I do believe that it played an important role in not only keeping Oregon schools open, but keeping school teachers employed in Oregon and across the nation, that you saw more road surfacing projects last summer than any time in the recent past. It played a very important role in keeping us out of an even, well, going from an economic ditch to an economic cliff. Like any other large piece of legislation, we don't have to like all of it. The vote we have is whether, at the end of the day, you want this or you want to reject it for its warts. We had to do some very hard and very distasteful things to keep us out of a second Great Depression. The stimulus bill has started some projects that will go on for 12, 18, 24 months, and we should be grateful for that. But as its other effects wear off, and we see this in Oregon, and that we're not going to get as much school assistance next year as we did in this school year. The problem will be keeping Oregon schools open the entire school year. We need to look at more focused individual efforts to get our economy going again. We're not going to be able to pass a global economic stimulus, a second global economic stimulus bill, or an economic stimulus bill that's large and encompasses a broad range of things. we're going to have to be focused on particular things. And in this vein, the surface transportation bill that Peter DeFazio and others have been working on very, very hard can play an important role because it builds necessary infrastructure for the long haul while generating jobs in the short haul. And the argument that those things are too slow to act seems to be belied by the quickness with which many state transportation agencies and municipalities got to work, and they say that they have a lot more shovel-ready projects ready to go. One part of legislation that got cut out from the original stimulus bill, which I fought for very, very hard, was construction of research facilities at colleges and universities. That gives us not only short-term construction jobs, but also it builds that capacity. You know, in addition to whatever innovation policy we have in place, it builds that research capacity so that we can grow our economy for the long term. And those are just a couple of examples of focused efforts that I think we need to engage in, because we are not out of the woods yet. The market is up, but there are other shoes hanging out there to drop. Anyone involved in commercial real estate and business law knows that there's a tremendous overhang of commercial leases coming up. The banks are rolling some of those, but if that doesn't go well, we not only have a problem in commercial real estate, we're going to have a second problem with our financial institutions. And just as there's no appetite to do a second stimulus bill, there certainly is no appetite to do a second bank bailout. Now, that's not going to happen.
We've come to the end of our program for this week. Please join us next week to learn more about the achievements of the 2009 Skidmore Prize winners. And as we close, please join me in expressing our appreciation to our speaker today, Congressman David Wu.
Thank you, Joe.